Today, we become legends.
We've all been crowd controlled into oblivion at one point in our Smite careers, but not all CCs were created equal. Today, we rank every crowd control in Smite from worst to best. There's a total of 25 different types of CC in Smite, believe it or not. When I first started writing for this video, I would have guessed there might be 12 to 15 or so, but there are a lot of CCs that are very niche or specific to one god, like Skadi's Slippery Surface CC for example. These are going to be very hard to rank as many CCs are extremely close to each other in power level, and so some of these positions are going to be absolutely open to debate. Leave your thoughts down below on that. So without further ado, let's just jump into the rankings. So kicking off the list at number 25 we have Insanity. Specific to only Cthulhu, this CC makes you see and hear things that aren't there. This might affect new players more than experienced ones, but to me this CC is more of just a nuisance and nothing more than that. I'm not counting the additional effects Cthulhu gets for this CC, like the magical power or the fear on his one. That'll be counted in the fear CC category. So the actual effect of being insane just doesn't impact your game in any meaningful way, really. You can still move freely, use basic attacks, cast abilities, do anything you would normally want to do. This just doesn't cut it in my opinion, and it's my pick for the worst CC in the game. So on number 24, the second worst CC in the game in my opinion is Intoxication. Now, I love Bacchus as much as the next guy, but the way I made this list was basically asking myself, would I rather be hit by this or this? And I did that for every CC to rank them. And I found myself always saying that I'd rather be intoxicated than almost any other CC, so this is where it stands. You can still do everything you normally would want to do under the effects of this CC, just a little bit worse than normal. You can't move very well, but you can still move in a general direction using normal movement, and the vision distortion is inconsequential really, and so this is where this CC sits. Coming in as the third worst CC in the game, we have Vortexes. This is the effect that Hades ult gives. This is similar to Intoxication in that you can still do everything as normal, like move, cast abilities, use basic attacks, you're just being pulled towards a central location. Which isn't nothing, don't get me wrong, if you have no beads, no movement ability, or no CC immune ult, a Vortex can still be deadly. But realistically, if you're playing against a strong Vortex, you should have at least one of beads, CC immune ult, or a movement ability to escape this, and too often it feels like Vortexes just do nothing and they're very hard to make work. Often needing another CC or very specific setups to be effective, such as Poseidon's Whirlpool that has a cripple in addition to the Vortex. At number 22 we have Trembles. Not a very common CC, but also not a very good one in my opinion. A Tremble is sort of like the previous two CCs combined into one. It pulls you slowly towards the source of the Tremble, while also making your movement quite erratic and hard to control. I won't spend too long on this one because it pretty much is Intoxication combined with a Vortex, and so it sits just above those two on the list. For number 21 I have Blinds. This one was hard to place, as sometimes it feels like Blinds are super OP and other times they feel utterly useless. The addition of Loki's Blind probably bumped this one up a place or two because it feels like Ra's Blind is very easy to deal with and X-Bal's is an ult. As I said, these are very inconsistent, but at their peak they can basically cause you to die, but most of the time I feel they don't perform that well and they only impact one of your options, Vision. You can still move, cast and basic attack just fine. Coming in at number 20 is Disarms. We're now moving into a decent section of the list in the middle here that consists of CCs that inhibit just one function of your character but leave the rest untouched. Considering that most characters in the game don't even really care if they're disarmed, it's just a bit of a nuisance to a lot of characters, I have this one lower than some of the others that affect more common areas of God's kits. Yes, disarms can be devastating to ADCs and some assassins, but they're nearly useless against most mages, guardians, and honestly a lot of assassins and warriors that are more ability based, so this is where disarms stand for me. At number 19 we have Banishes. This one might surprise you for being so low, but I just really don't like Banishes and they don't seem to do much for me. Really, their main use is just to set up the hit of another ability that's hard to land, like a Rault or something. Since the target can't be hit while they're banished, this just feels like a stun, but way worse. And while it feels weird to put it this low, when I really think about it and rank it against other CCs, it probably deserves to be here. For number 18, I have Pulls, another one that impacts just one of your primary avenues for controlling your character. This of course displaces your character, which to be honest acts very similar to a Banish, as that gives you time to position around the enemy while they're banished and land some hits on the way down, while a Pull just takes them straight into the danger zone. So really, Pulls and Banishes could be interchangeable in my eyes, they're probably about the same. But to be clear, pulls are just pulls. Any extra effects like the stun on Sylvanas' pull are just that, extra effects. I'm talking solely about the pull here. Also, another disclaimer, grabs and pulls are different things, so abilities like Fenrir's ult are not pulls, they're grabs, and they'll be placed later in the list. Moving on to number 17, we're starting to get into some quite good CCs now. Cripples are taking this spot for me as they disable one of your core options for most gods. Movement in Smite is universally important, and most gods in the game have a movement ability of some sort, and when that is shut down, they can become easy targets, or even in some cases have their damage output shut down, such as Fenrir or Serket. The reason cripples are above the likes of disarms is because most characters use movement abilities frequently rather than using basic attacks for their damage, which is less common. Next up we have slows, the most common CC in Smite by a good margin and a decently powerful one. Slows on the face of it might seem like they should be lower, I mean all they do is slow you down a bit, right? But the fact that most slows in the game are obnoxiously long and often easy to apply bumps them up a few places in my eyes. Looking at what a slow actually does, and then looking at a Bellona with Frostbound Hammer perma-slowing you are two different viewpoints, and so I think it deserves a slightly higher placement than you might think. Breaking the top 15, we have Ramp to Root. I won't talk too much about this one because Root is literally up next and they're basically the same thing. A Ramp to Root is basically an accelerating slow that ends in a root. Baron Samji's 3 is a good example. So at number 14 is Roots, another CC that disables one core part of your character, and movement is arguably the most important of all. Yes, you can still use movement abilities, which does limit the usefulness of Roots quite a bit, but getting your movement ability or beads force by just a root is still a win for the root user, and they can then hit you with a much harder CC later on that you can't cleanse. The reason roots are placed above ramp to root is because I would rather have the root activate immediately rather than have to wait for it to act and give the enemy more time to react and play around it. At number 13, we have Skadi's unique CC, Slippery Surface. Do you guys hate this one as much as me, or am I placing this one as high as it is because of Salt? This CC just seems to absolutely ruin me every time it hits, despite the fact that on paper it's very similar to a pull, which I put further down the list. Losing control of your movement entirely is already pretty bad, but add the fact that if the Skadi player is half decent, they'll send you straight into a tower or her entire team. I don't know, as I said, this may be a placement fueled by Salt, so let me know how you feel about Slippery Surface down below. Coming in at number 12 are Silences. I was originally going to put Silences a bit lower on the list, but after actually thinking about it, they deserve this spot. They're basically like a cripple, but way better, because they stop using any ability, not just movement abilities. These are of course more deadly to mages, but any god in the game will have a bad time when you limit them using their abilities. This is much higher than disarms mainly for that reason. It's applicable to every god in the game in a major way, but obviously excels in certain situations. Number 11 is the Mesmerize. This was another one that was hard to place because of its high variance. In the best case, mezzes can be almost as good as stuns. You can't hit the enemy, but generally mezzes last longer than stuns to make up for this. Look at Kumba's Yawn, it lasts like 3.5 seconds or something. However, if you end up hitting that enemy in the duration, or more likely if your teammate hits them to be honest, this CC can be close to useless because of course Mesmerizes break as soon as that target takes damage. So yeah, depending on the use case, you could argue for this one to go up or down a few places on the list. And finally, we've arrived at the top 10. These are the best CCs in the game in my opinion, and none of them are bad, just some are better than others. So at number 10 we have Polymorphs. This is Cern's ult, Hera's 2, etc. Polymorphs disable everything except your movement. They're basically a disarm, a silence, and a slow all rolled into one, which is incredibly powerful. And yes, the slow is a part of the CC itself and not an additional effect on the abilities. Every polymorph in the game slows the target. So while not quite as good as a stun because the enemy can still move, polymorphs are still one of the most powerful CCs in the game, and if you get hit by one with no beads, you're gonna have a bad time. Taking the number 9 spot is Grabs. Now let me be clear, the only reason Grabs aren't top 5 is because it disables your own character as well as the enemy you're grabbing. I mentioned this earlier in the list, but pulls are not grabs, they're different CCs. Fenrir's ult, Kuzumbo's dash, Kepri's 1, these are all grabs. Sylvanas 3 though, that's a pull. Grabs are basically stuns, but you can move the enemy around at the same time, which is extremely powerful. However, the fact that your own god is also disabled and can't do anything except move for the duration means they are knocked down a few places. At number 8, I have Ramp to Stun. Similar to Ramp to Root, I'll talk more about this in the next placement because Ramp to Stun and Stun are basically the same thing. This effect has a ramping slow followed into a stun, think Chronos 3. And at number 7 we have Stuns. The Old Faithful of Smite CCs, one of the most common in the game, but not the best in the game. Stuns are always reliable and strong, your target is completely disabled from doing anything except purifying the CC, they can't cast, basic attack, or move for the duration. The reason stuns are ahead of ramp to stun is the same reason why roots were ahead of ramp to root. It's better to have the effect instantly rather than on a delay. At number 6 we have Disorients. Not too much to talk about here, they're basically stuns with the small added bonus of spinning the enemy god around so they're facing the wrong direction when the effect ends. Mercury's ult is a good example of this. Honestly, these are only a hair's width better than stuns, but since they literally are a stun with an added effect, it has to place slightly higher than stuns. Speaking of stuns with added effects, breaking the top 5 are knockbacks, not knockups. These are two different CCs, despite the fact that they often get used interchangeably. Knockbacks push the enemy away, but they stay grounded and can be purified. Knockups launch them into the air and cannot be purified. I'll talk more about those later though. Knockbacks push the enemy away, and for the duration they can't do anything except beads. It's basically a stun with displacement added on top of it, which is why it's just above Disorients. I feel the displacement on these is better than the spin effect of Disorients, so it places one higher. At number 4 we have Fears. When I was first brainstorming this list, Fears were definitely not on my radar for a top 5 placement, but when I actually compared every CC to the others, Fears are basically stuns with the bonus of displacement. The enemy basically can't do anything except beads, and they'll just run away from the source of the fear. Hades 2 on blighted enemies is probably the best example of a fear. This and knockback are extremely similar things and could be swapped if you wanted to, but the reason I have fears one place higher is because I feel like fears generally last longer than knockbacks. And we're finally here. Breaking into the top 3 we have taunts. Everyone in the game, including tanks, fears an Athena taunt, and it's no surprise why. Not only are you completely disabled aside from beads, you're also displaced towards the taunter, who is almost always a frontliner, so you're being pulled towards the enemy team. But if multiple enemies are hit by your taunt, you group them all up for insane follow-up potential from a big Majol or really anything your team has to offer. Many teamfights have been won off the back of an Athena taunt into Scylla combo, and they are by far one of the most powerful CCs in the game. And the second best CC in the game, in my opinion, is Madness, not Insanity. Despite being very similar names, these CCs could not be more different, with one of them being the worst CC in the game by far, and one of them being top 3. Madness causes affected enemies to attack a nearby ally, or walk harmlessly towards the caster if there are no nearby allies for them to attack. So even on its own, this CC is great. Just having the enemy walk towards you harmlessly is basically a taunt, but better since they don't attack you where they do attack you if you're in a taunt. But if you manage to hit Madness on 2 or more enemies at once, like with Discordia 2 or Circuit 2, this becomes arguably the best CC in the game, as it groups the enemies up for follow-up damage similar to a taunt, but you aren't being attacked by those enemies, they're attacking each other instead. This CC is somewhat situational in its power level, but even in the worst case it's basically a taunt but better, so it definitely deserves the number 2 spot. However, all of these CCs up to this point, even Madness and Taunts, can be hard countered by Purification Beads, as they can be used even while under the effects of CC. Knockups, however, are the king of CCs because they can't be cleansed once they impact. If you get hit by a Bacchus belly flop, you're in the air for that full duration no matter what. You can't even beads. Well, you can, but you'll just waste them, it won't actually have any effect. This is the reason that distinguishing between knock-ups and knock-backs is so important. The former is much more powerful than the latter. Knockups are basically uncleansable stuns, and with the extreme prevalence of purification beads in Smite, with basically every squishy and even tanks sometimes buying them, having a CC that can't be cleansed by these is simply the most powerful crowd control in the game, hands down. But that's my list of 25 CCs in Smite ranked worst to best. As I said at the start of the video, some of these CCs are very close in power level and could move up or down 1 or 2 spots on the list depending on what you value the most out of your crowd control. So let me know down below your best and worst CCs, and also what you think about Scuddy's Slippery Surface CC. Are you as salty as I am, or do you think I overrated it? Let me know, but other than that, I'll catch you guys in another video later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.